Thank you. Just following on from the question from Mrs. Kane. Before I got into politics, certainly I would view, and many people I know would view, the role of president as somewhat aloof. And given that perception was the order then, do you think the perception still applies today? And if we were to go down and stand outside Marks and Spencer's and ask 20 people who the president of Tynwald is, what percentage do you think would answer the question correctly? Thank you.
I think you get a high percentage, because I think that with Mr. President Roden departing, I think he's had an awful lot of coverage. Most of the time, is it right that the President is the centre of attention? Well, it's certainly not in Manx politics, no. That shouldn't, the presiding officer shouldn't be the focus. In terms of that outreach, which is far softer, which is far about that educational piece, it's not necessarily about sort of constantly having your photo in the newspaper, but that's certainly an element of it, as we talked earlier about the media question. I certainly don't think the President should be aloof. Where I think the President has a different role is that he needs to be seen as impartial by all sides, and if he's too chummy with any one faction, any one group, any one individual even, then that does have the potential to create concerns about the impartiality and integrity, and I wouldn't want to see that as part of the role. So there is that balance to be struck.
Is the public perception of aloofness, do you think, still exists?
I don't know about that. I would certainly be keen to combat it, because I think that, like all politicians on the Isle of Man, whether you're the President or backbencher, you do need to be accessible by the public in any way, shape or form, because we are all public servants, even though as President you wouldn't have a mandate from the public.
Yeah, besides the recent coverage of the retiring President, if you did stand outside Marks and Spencer's, 20 people walk by, unless it's one of you, chances are I don't think you probably would know who it is, to be quite honest with you. Is that a good thing, is that a bad thing? It probably, there's no easy, no straightforward answer, but what I would say is it goes along with what we talked about earlier, and that is the difference between Parliament and government, and therefore that's part of the outreach of the comms programme that as Tynwald, and I say the Tynwald office, needs to take on. It's not just the President that plays that particular role. And there are people with regard, we've had the situation where members, probably for the first administration, we've got multiple members who are not members of departments. They would regard themselves as parliamentarians, and many of them do. So what's the difference of that role of being a minister, being in a department, being a speaker, being a president? So it's an educational, and it's really an ongoing comms plan, I would affect, but we probably all play a role in respect to that.
Bill?
Thank you, Judy. I'd like to return to the subject of, are you a traditionalist, a preservationist, or are you a moderniser looking to bring Tynwald forward and more accessible? If I could perhaps just talk about the way we dress as an example. So I have to wear a tie, or else I'm not allowed to speak in the chamber. That's what I've been told by the presiding officers of both chambers, and the presiding officer currently wears a wig in 2021. I mean, so what do you think about having to wear a tie to speak? And also, will you ditch the wig and get with the modern age? What's your view?
Right.
Are you going to carry on dressing up?
Fair enough. Fair question. I describe myself as a modern Manxman with traditional values. That's the way I put myself over. And you mentioned there the tie. I wrote to the previous president and asked, could I wear a Manx tartan tie on a national day? And it was declined. So hopefully that would demonstrate my view on that. Again, there's the standards here, and you just need to build a consensus.
And the wig? Did you wear the wig or not?
I really haven't thought beyond that, to be honest with you, at this particular moment in time. But everything should be considered. But there is tradition, and again, modernisation is one thing, and I think again we have to be very careful, because this is and I repeat again, the most ancient institution on this island. So we have this unique situation, the tricameral system, for example. You know, when we start to talk about modernising and reforming, we should do that in a well-considered way. When you wear a wig, where you wear a tie, they're probably very small scale, you know, in the scheme of things. So I'm indifferent, shall we say, at this particular moment in time, but I think I highlight my view whether I want to wear a Manx tartan tie on Tynwald Day.
Tynwald and the House of Keys is a formal environment. It is a business formal, and what business formal is forever changing. And when I said about that review of standing orders, I think this is something that is definitely in the hands of the members, and if members are happy for ties, we see more often than not that jackets aren't worn in the chamber now than they are, and that's just about practicality getting in the way. I'm a great believer in tradition. I'm a great admirer and respecter of tradition. But when it gets in the way, it's time to look at it. I have never worn the wig in the Tynwald chamber. It gets in the way. You can't see the edges of the Legislative Council when you're wearing the wig. It doesn't bother me in the House Keys. It's a bit hot, it's a bit itchy. It's a tradition. It doesn't get in anyone else's way. It's not a problem. But in Tynwald, I think I would ditch it for anything other than Tynwald Day.
I would realise it's more of a symbolic thing.
Yeah.
In terms of your mindset.
Get it.
Tradition is long, but the post actually relatively new, isn't it?
Yes, you're right.
The post of president goes back to 1990. The tradition of wearing the wig, whilst it goes all the way back to the restoration of the monarchy in the 1660s in the UK, it was actually reintroduced here in 1919. So it's had a checkered past.
Hi. So I'm going to do Chris almost do 3 questions in one. The first one is standing orders. What revolution do you see in that, or are you just happy the way it is? What do you see the importance of being, if you like, the ambassador for Tynwald, or do you see that as part of the role or not part of the role? And also, just finally, you may have covered it already, but why and why now do you want to be president?
Okay. In terms of standing orders, I think it's time that we start with a blank sheet of paper. It's something that we can do, we should do every now and then to challenge why we do some things and see what's still relevant for modern time and what isn't. So back to Mr. Shimon's early comment about what times we sit, what days we sit. Does that still work for members? Do the hours that we sit work for members? So that's first part of it. Does the way that we do business still work? And that's why we have had the concept of the register for business to allow some more evolution on that. So there are things in there that we've started doing. I think there's more can be done with the engagement of the public and the members of Tynwald as they come in. It's also about making Tynwald accessible. Accessible to the public, accessible to the media, and accessible to the fellow members. That's also absolutely critical. So they're the sort of themes that would, I think, come out of a review of standing orders. I think I've covered in my opening statement at length the ambassadorial work I've already done and would do again in terms of promoting the Isle of Man. I think that's been a big theme so far of what both Lawrence and I have talked about from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, the British Irish Parliamentary Association, and the contacts we've already had, making sure that members get the education that they need, selling the Isle of Man at home and abroad as is necessary, but really more often at home. Why now? Having done 5 years as Speaker, having done 15 years, that when Steve indicated to me that he was going to be standing down, I naively thought that I was the best candidate for the job, the most qualified, the most experienced in the area of being a presiding officer, so I put my name forward.
Okay, standing orders, I would think at minimum they should be an annual review. But it again is a standing orders committee there as and when issues do arise that can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our Parliament, then I think earlier action should take place. The ambassadorial role, I think we both highlighted. I think the value of that is probably understated, and it's something I would want to be a lot more active. And it gets back to being this a full-time role, and there's a lot of I think effort that could go into that. To be honest with you, and why now? When we stand to be a politician, we stand to serve the people, to stand to serve the nation. This is public service here, and in this particular case for me, and I'll explain my situation, my peers invited me to stand. And what I said when I entered politics, I would do whatever job I was asked to do, and I have done it to date. And if my peers ask me, believe that I can do this job, then I will absolutely give it my best to do so.
Daphne?
Well, thank you. It's apparent that both of you have the knowledge, the experience, the skills to be presiding officer at Tynwald. But if you had to identify one characteristic, trait or skill that you had that makes you have the advantage over the other candidate, what is it? But also, what would you identify as your opponent's key skill that would give them the advantage?
Who's the best candidate? That's simple. You have to decide. You know us. We're well known to you. You know our backgrounds, you know our skills, experience, and ultimately you know our weaknesses and our strengths. And really, who is the best candidate? It really is for you to decide. And you know, we can talk what we think it is, but it's really what you think. And that comes down to what you think about our integrity, our values, our morals. But it is I do believe it is for you to decide.
Yeah, but what do you think is your advantage?
To be honest with you, it's probably a combination because there's so many different things, and I'd probably go back to those 7 principles of public life, and I look at those when I try and make a decision or what troubles me. I look at those different areas, and they're all simple stuff about being honest, being open, being transparent, selfless. You know, do you have integrity? Are you showing leadership? You know, those are the sort of measures that I look at, and I hope that I've got some of that in me in all those particular 7 principles.
Yeah, in terms of skill, I suppose it would be a passion for the institution, have the experience, and the knowledge, the keen desire to support the people within Tynwald that make up Tynwald, and I think that's the thing that I would like to do most. In terms of the second half of your question, I've made it a policy over the last 15 years that I won't talk about my opponents on the hustings, and I'm not going to start now.
Kerry?
You've both talked about the need for improved outreach and communications programme with the public, which is fantastic. In an ideal world, what would the Tynwald office and members and the President be doing?
Well, I think we've covered an awful lot of this as well in terms of the outreach at home and abroad. I think in terms of what that outreach means, it's not just about through connecting with media, social media, and with clubs, groups, organisations, societies. It's about being out and about. It's about getting around this island at all the events and highlighting who we are and what we do. If that means taking a stand at the Royal Show and the Southern Show to explain who Tynwald are and what we do, that's what we should be doing. It's about getting it out there in the face of people rather than waiting for people to come to us. And I think that's that proactivity that we need in terms of doing that. And I think that's something that the President can do without treading on any political toes.
Yeah, so an outreach programme is what needs to be reviewed, and it probably needs to be reviewed. It's not just the President. This is probably a committee issue because you need a comms plan. We talk about media and all the different opportunities that raises, and we talk about the island, but I think it needs a comms plan effectively. And what that will come down to will be resource. Because we got a very stretched office down there. Is there somebody in charge of marketing and PR and comms? No. So do you know? No, we don't know.
But there used to be apparently
exactly
a full-time education officer.
But then. So there lies. So there's a case that needs to be put to why extra resource needs to be placed in that office downstairs. We can talk about that and we can promote it, but at the end of the day, a business case, and usually it would be a committee that would want to put that together and put that as a comms plan. And it's not something that just happens overnight. A proper comms plan needs to be constructed, needs to be resourced and funded.
Try and wrap up by 3. Claire's next.
Yeah, just a quick one for me. How do you see the role of the President focusing on increasing diversity, both in those who are engaging in the elections, but also those who might put themselves forward to stand, both for the hustings and Legislative Council, so that we get a true representation, at least on the ballot sheets, as the starting position?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier about getting out and about and pushing what Tynwald is and what it does out there. There's a lot of misconceptions about what Tynwald is, and we face it every time we go knocking on doors in elections. I do believe, though, that a rising tide raises all boats. So the more we can get out there and do that as collectively, but also I think for the President to take a personal lead in that and being perhaps a front runner in making sure that we are out and about and telling people what the difference is, educating people the difference, educating what parliamentarians do, what we are and what we're not. I think the cultural changes that have happened over the last few years as well have helped a lot in terms of encouraging people in. It's far less antagonistic, it's far less confrontational in the chamber, and it doesn't always feel it, but it's certainly, compared to when I started, I think it is, and I'd like to think that I've been a part of that cultural change in terms of making Tynwald an environment where everyone can feel valued and where people aren't treated with respect, that people are pulled up for that.
Yeah, I guess that comes down to what probably should be Tynwald values. You know, we have come a long way in a very short space of time, and I'll come back to that, the equality bill that we moved. And what we need to do, we collectively need to look at that to see what more can we do to actually promote that particular issue. Diversity is important, there's no doubt about it, and as I say, whilst we've come a long way, it's still on a journey. And it, again, presidents can play a figurehead, a role in promoting that, and no doubt about it. But again, we all have a role and responsibility in that. And as I say, I'm really very much encouraged for what I've seen in these few short years from where it was only 5 years ago. So there's big changes happening. And in terms of encouraging candidates, I know I've spoken to many already in double figures who are thinking about what, you know, and concerned for various different things. And the president does have a role in that as well, in terms of advising people. You can be impartial, but you can certainly advise people as to what the role, the responsibility, and also encourage people to come forward, because it's a big undertaking. You all know that. It's the biggest public interview you can have, and this one here is normally done behind closed doors, and today we see more openness, you know, and I think again that's part of public life. We should recognise, we should be open, and we should be transparent.
One last one from Tanya, or have you left your hand up?
Sorry, no, didn't leave hand up. Still got more questions, you know what I'm like. Here's an interesting, I suppose, one for you. But I've got my baby right here next to me, and she's only 2 months old, and I'm wondering, not for myself, but for those women that may be my age down the line that may want to stand for legislative council and have young children or young babies. How do you feel about breastfeeding in the chamber? And the second question is about legislative council standing orders specifically. Which tool do you feel, and this is just trying to figure out exactly how much of an understanding of legislative council standing orders you have, which tool do you feel is most effective that may be used by a member?
I'm not sure the second question there, Tanya. What do you mean in terms of legislative standing orders?
As in terms of a tool that may be used by legislative council members, say for example a conference between the House of Keys and legislative council on a difficult piece of legislation.
Well, that's probably for the modernisation, I guess. If they're again, it's about trying to demonstrate value. You can change the standing orders if there's sufficient consensus to do that. With regards to, I guess, breastfeeding in the chamber, that's an interesting one. It's hard to know why you want to do that, but if you do want to do that, then then it comes down to again a standing orders potential change in respect to it. President would be impartial, should be impartial, about that. What we do also think about is how do we allow people to work. It's not just the female; it's a male who may want to stay at home with their young one as well. Paternity leave, which we've managed to progress some of that in our time here. So how can you continue to contribute whilst being at home and available for your family. And it's not just young ones, sometimes it might be elderly. You might want to care for your parents or others as well at the same time. And this is all about the mobile working, which is now becoming the norm for everyone. So flexibility is vital, it is important. So it's just a matter of understanding what is the best way to allow you to continue to perform, in your case, or our case about parliamentarians or government ministers or backbenchers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the real key here is about engagement and the technology that can allow you to be in the chamber without being in the chamber. In terms of what I said earlier, I think that we should be far more encouraging of people's lifestyles in terms of things that until things get in the way, they should be allowed. And that's my starting point. And as I say this is the move of the breastfeeding bill as a private member's bill when I was a backbencher. And that's something that the members will determine, but that's certainly would be no problem for me in that happening. Also in terms of co-parenting, as Lawrence said, this isn't just about people with babies, it's about people who may have other caring responsibilities, and we need to strike the right balance between people who cannot make it into the chamber and people who cannot contribute, and that's something that we need to look at carefully. It's something that Standing Orders Committee has already commissioned work on. In terms of most effective tool in the Legislative Council's armoury, I think at the moment there's a real underused tool there in terms of question time. Questions are underused in Legislative Council. Of course, also in Legislative Council there's the ability to seek leave to introduce a private member's bill to raise issues of legislative concern. But really, I think this is a trick question, and I think that the most effective tool at Legislative Council's disposal is to move a motion in Tynwald, where there is far greater publicity than Legislative Council does tend to get at the moment.
Okay, that's all the questions. Just like to thank everybody, and particularly the two candidates for taking part. As we all know, somebody could put their hat in the ring at the sit-in on the day. I'm not aware of anybody at the moment. I'm not sure if anybody else is. But I think this has been the first step to some modernisation, having a hustings and having the camera here today. So thank you, Paul, for doing that. And thanks everybody for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.